First, you're going to ask, what are the minimums being driven by? It's probably going to be a combination of raw materials.
That's a great question.
And bulk production. But I think it's good to know which lever is the highest, right? Because then you can determine, okay, if it is the bulk production line.
Do you have a brilliant product idea but don't know where to start to get it made? Or are you looking to level up your product but afraid to take it overseas?
If so, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jackie.
And I'm Erin. And we are
the Sourcing Gals,
your trusted guides to everything you need to know about sourcing, manufacturing, and scaling your product overseas. Whether you are just starting out or you've been making your own product for a while, we are here to help women source products overseas without the overwhelm.
In each episode, we'll share insider tips, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories to help you source more effectively, save time, and boost your profits. Duh! We know how hard it can be to juggle the ins and outs of product development, but don't worry, we've got your back.
So grab a cup of coffee, get comfy, and let's dive into how you can grow your business,
make more money,
and turn your products into profit. Welcome to
the Sourcing Gals. Now let's get started. High five.
Hi.
Awesome. So excited to be here. Welcome to another episode of
the Sourcing Gals.
Today we're tackling MOQs. What's an MOQ, Erin? What does that stand for?
Now, it's minimum order quantity. If you are still questioning any of these retail acronyms, we did talk about this, I think, 3 episodes ago. Take a listen. It's a meaty episode, but has a lot of good info. But back to MOQs, minimum order quantity.
These are things that you will see literally everywhere when you start sourcing, right? It might be at the header next to the factory name, MOQs, MOQs, MOQs. And it can be really intimidating, especially when you're starting out and you're literally not even sure how many units you want to buy and what you can afford to buy yet.
Yeah.
You're being kind of forced into these conversations of, well, what do I have to buy from the factory's side? So it can be scary. It can sound challenging, but we wanted here today to talk to you about all the ways in which you can work with MOQs, and that sometimes an MOQ is not really the minimum.
Right.
So let's talk about that.
Yes. So before we get into how they apply to our businesses and how to work around them, Jackie, would you mind talking through the kind of why they exist from the factory end on a logistical standpoint?
Yeah. So if you have to think about, if you've never Googled a factory line and what it actually looks to create a product, I would highly suggest you do it because it is fascinating. And it is also amazing how many steps go into a garment. I'm going to speak about garments, for example. So a t-shirt, how many different sewers are on a sewing line to make one t-shirt? It's not actually one person making the whole garment. Everyone becomes an expert in one specific part of that garment. It might be the cutting. It might be the side seam. It might be adding the neckband. It might be making a turn back hem. That's literally each person or persons are responsible for every single component of that garment.
So the sourcing line, a bunch of people lined up on a floor.
Yes.
One person is just doing neckbands all day long.
All day long. All day long, adding a neckband, adding a neckband, adding a neckband, passing it over to the person on their left, literally down the factory line, like an assembly line, until the very, very end, you have a finished garment. So you have to think about how many touches are going in to each item that you are making, right? There's a people aspect to it. So if you are asking to literally make 1 unit, 5 units, 10 units, there's a good likelihood that that is still going to require multiple people to make it. So that you might hear the factory talk about, we have to set the lines up. We have to set the lines up. Literally, that means they are putting together the people that it takes to produce that one item.
And the machinery.
So it's not just people and training, right? You have to train someone. If it's a new item, they have to get efficient at it, learn exactly the nuances of it. Then you have to set the machinery up. Now think about it. When you are adding a neckband to a t-shirt versus a side seam, those are actually different stitch tensions, sometimes different thread size.
A different type of sewing
machine. So the actual preparation to set up a line is a lot of times one facet of what can determine an MOQ for a factory.
Right. And to break it down kind of a little bit further, this is how I always explain it when I have a new person on my team who's like, forget it. This isn't real. I think about man hours and think about the fact that if there are 8 people in that line touching your t-shirt, those 8 people each have 8 hours a day, let's say. So we're looking at 64 man hours per day. So if that costs the factory 64 man hours times, let's say $10, just for nice, easy numbers, $640 just to operate for one day. They're not going to run 50 units. They're not going to come out even.
Yep.
So they need, the minimums come to the point where at the factory level, they do their numbers and they say, okay, for this to work out for me, I'm going to need 500 units to pay all these folks for the amount of days it takes, because they could probably do 500 in a day, and to make a little bit of profit.
Correct. And there's a flip side to that. So we're talking about the production line, which is usually when you're getting to bulk manufacturing. Some factories are willing to work on smaller MOQs because they're actually making your garments in a sample room. So there are times where, again, to get one t-shirt made before you're able to move to bulk production, those are actually done in sample sewing rooms. So there might actually be only 1 or 2 people that are trained to just make samples all day long. And I actually have an interesting story. I had to do a replenishment for my own PJs recently, a very small replenishment. My sizes were off, so I needed to cut some extra 2XLs, 3XLs, and extra small. So I call them fringe sizes, the sizes on the outside. I did not have enough units to make a bulk production run. So my vendor was willing to make them in the sample room. So they're still perfectly made garments, but they were literally made in a sample room, not on a bulk production line, because I was literally ordering 25 of them. Now, I paid more for them, right?
Because those people are much more specialized.
Much more specialized. Again, you're training, one person's going to do multiple operations on my garment versus it being 8 different people. But for me, it was willing to pay the upcharge to get them made in the sample room. It also sped up the timeline of getting them back in stock. And so again, that's just one way, and we'll talk a little bit further about that, how you can kind of break apart the struggles with MOQs.
And I want to add on to that, because I've made a lot of things in sample rooms over the years, that those types of asks are usually well received if you have a good relationship with your factory. Because when you are making it in the sample room, that means they are not making samples for Joe Schmo down the street who needs their samples for their market appointment. You know, they're pausing for a second to get your units out.
Correct. So I think there are, again, ways to alleviate the production line by utilizing sample rooms, requesting those for sure. But then there's another huge component of MOQs when it comes to the raw material side of what drives it. So I can talk, again, if I go down the t-shirt route, when you think about, there's the sewing component, which is really the back end. But long before they're sewing, they're having to procure the raw materials. That's down to the yarn, the fabric, the thread, and any trims and details you're adding, tags in the back neck. So there is a lot of times MOQs are a result of the minimum yardage needed for fabric, for example. So that could be sourced in a multitude of ways. So when you talk to certain factories and you start looking into your opportunities, that MOQ, you can ask the question, what is helping drive this minimum? Is this a bulk production minimum, or is this really a result of the fabric that you're trying to use, the raw material you're trying to use? Because even thinking about raw material sourcing, if you need something very custom from scratch, there are fabric mills that will work on 500 meters. A lot of times they talk in meters versus yards. It's a very similar equation, but a lot of times it could be a 500 meter MOQ. Up to 2,000 or 2,500 is kind of more the world of bulk manufacturing that you might reside in. A lot of times they will do color mins. So they might say, hey, you need to buy 2,000 meters of fabric, but we're willing to do a dye lot, which means literally the color that they dye that fabric in. We're willing to break the dye lot down to 500 units. Yes. So with 2,000 meters of fabric, you can make 4 colors out of that. And I kind of like to say a meter of fabric, kind of assume like a 1 t-shirt to 1 meter ratio. That's like very rough math, and depending on your sizes and all the different things, but just kind of like a ratio. If you think about 1 yard of fabric, like if you fold that over, what can you make out of it? So just interesting to know and ask those questions, because sometimes it's driven by your raw materials and not actually setting up the line.
Correct. And have a little non-apparel example too, because sometimes the MOQs, it's not just about getting that line set up. A lot of the things that I buy come straight from machinery. There aren't necessarily people. I think about like acrylic claw clips for your hair or something like that. Like that's straight coming out of a machine. So you might say, okay, well, this is coming out of a machine. Obviously, a line isn't in line making plastic claw clips, but these machines are quite large. I'd say 12 feet by 6 feet size wise. They take up a full room. To get them going, when you plug them in and put electricity to them and they take heat, when you get them going, they take half a day or so to get up and running. And then when they're up and running, what pops out of the machine is usually a little disformed. It's not quite right. They're tinkering with the knobs and the heat and the molds. And then finally, after however many rounds of this machine working, you get some really good stuff. So it starts putting out good stuff after a day of being on and being in operation. And people, taking them off of the machines, putting them aside to dry. And so that's a piece of it. The other piece of it is when you change color, you have to wash out that machine, get all of that pink acrylic out to put green acrylic in. And like, that's a whole process. So it can take days, weeks to just go through the process for making the bare minimum. So obviously, once they get everything geared up and ready to go, they want to make as much as possible. Think about like if you were to get your Cuisinart out and you're making like pasta, you've got your pasta maker, you're getting everything going. You did all of that work. You're not going to make one bowl for yourself.
Correct. You're batching that.
You're batching that. Yes.
Batch.
So that's what's going on behind the scenes, whether it's a person working on a line or whether it's a very large piece of machinery that has to get up and going. And even when it's people working on a line, sometimes the first few that come off aren't quite right. You've got QC, QA on the end. Just making sure that everything's going right, correcting people, that training that Jackie mentioned. So it's, there's a lot that goes into getting that set up. And especially not in apparel. In apparel, a lot of times you can, like Jackie said, run a whole roll of 5,000 meters and divide it into color. But when it comes to other accessories and stuff, sometimes you can't do that.
Correct. And in regards to, again, ways to work around MOQs, right? They might say, well, based on the fabric you're asking for, it's 2,000 meter minimum. If you are willing to be flexible, your factory might have alternative options similar that would be able to run on lower minimums. So let me give a good example for this. I have a customer that comes in and says, I want a 62, like a very specific blend, 62% cotton, X% rayon. And they have this idea in their head because they saw something in the market that they just loved and had to have it exactly.
They went to a store, they loved the
t-shirt, looked at the label, sent it to me and said, this is what we need. So I go to my factory with that. Okay, great. They're starting from scratch because they don't have anything available in that exact same content, in that exact same weight that my client wants. I then ask my client, would you be willing to take something similar? They're like, oh, yeah, I just saw this at XYZ store. I just really thought it was great. I like the hand feel. I like the way it felt on my body. So I go back to the factory and say, hey, the customer is actually willing to bend on this. Do you have anything similar in a similar weight, similar content? Turns out the factory did have something already existing. All of a sudden, the minimum went from 2,500 down to 1,000 because they didn't have to do any research and development, R&D on their end. Also, our timeline got cut dramatically shorter. When my fabric mill has to make fabric from scratch, you are talking at least a 30-day lead time to knit the fabric, then make the sample, then send to me. When they have available fabric sitting in their sample room, all of a sudden my sample turn time is 7 to 10 days.
Awesome.
So we save time, we save the customer money just by asking the question, hey, do you have something similar? Now that might not always work for every product category, but a lot of factories, especially when you think about factories that are in China, in India, they have raw material markets. So they can even go and shop the market for you. It's literally like the largest Joann fabric you'll ever see.
It's like, I'm like a kid in the candy store when I go to those things. That is probably my favorite part of my job, is going to materials markets.
So imagine literally you're telling your vendor, hey, I want to make this bag, for example, and I'm looking for a black and white gingham check because XYZ, I want it for spring and this is what I'm doing with it. So they can either make that from scratch, right, which is going to have higher minimums, it's going to have longer lead times, or your factory may be willing to just go to their local fabric market and find something similar.
And you might love it.
And you might love it even more. And it's going to be more cost effective because you're not having to, knit or weave this fabric from scratch. And then down the road, as you learn, as you build your brand, then go custom all the way. But you don't always have to be forced into that custom track if you're just trying to start.
And the interesting part about that is that, a lot of brands, very high-end brands, or very, a lot of mall brands or niche brands that are particular about their brand and work on a long timeline, maybe they'll make their own fabrics, some of them, not all of them.
Correct.
But when you're thinking fast fashion, I don't know that any of those companies are making fabrics.
Correct. They're finding what's available.
They're finding what's available
in the market.
A certain very popular Spanish mass fashion brand, I know I've seen their designers in the market before when I've been there just picking stuff out and being like, let's make something out of this.
Yep.
Like they're have a cut in mind or maybe a shape in mind, but they're just going and kind of working with what's available to get it out to the market as quick as possible.
Yeah. So I think as you're developing your product, whatever that is, it is okay to ask the factory those questions. Hey, this is what I want. But if you have flexibility, any sort of flexibility, ask the factory to do some work on their end. See if there's something similar existing. See if they're willing to go to the market for you and see how you can maybe chip away at that MOQ at your lead time. I'll also say if you're speaking of hair clips, we're actually working on some hair clips for a client. And what was interesting is there is a raw material. Imagine plastic pellets, right? That get melted down, and that's what makes the acetate hair clips.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a minimum on how many pellets we had to buy. But turns out the pellets is like the most cheap part of the entire clip. So while they had a minimum raw material commit, we were actually able to amortize, throw away half of the pellets because the machinery only required us to make X amount. So we actually literally potentially will be trashing or holding for later, but literally kind of for the factory's sake, we're going to absorb all the cost for the entire pellets into the item price, even though we're only using half of the raw materials.
Honestly, this factory is going to keep it and use it for another customer.
Correct. They're not really going to throw it away.
Right. They're going to be like, score.
Yes. So I just think there's ways also to think about your raw material cost before it's cut and sewn, before it's melted, before it's made into a finished good. Do you actually need to use all of that, or can you pay the factory the cost for the raw material, but then actually only make a certain percentage of it?
That's a great point. And that brings me kind of to our next couple options when it comes to how to deal with an MOQ that's a little too high. One is dividing up those materials and seeing if you can pay for if it's a material thing, pay for the material in full, because it is going to be cheaper than paying for the finished good. And then only saying, okay, well, what's your MOQ on the finished good versus the material, and trying to negotiate that. Combining colorways, we talked about using existing materials. The other thing is if you talk to your vendor or your factory and you let them know that you're a new brand, you're testing this idea, and that you really want to get it right before you have like a huge bulk order, you might be able to convince them into using the sample room, which Jackie mentioned. But if all of that kind of fails, what you can do is ask for tiered pricing. So you can say, all right, I understand your minimum is 5,000 pieces. I need to buy 250. Can we come to an agreement on paying more on the 250 so that the factory itself recoups some of their costs, but you also get 250? And the factory could do some math and say, all right, we could do 400 at $10, but if you order the 5,000, it'll be $5. And so tiered pricing is another way to kind of negotiate to let the factory know that you're willing to pay a little more if you can get a lower quantity, and they'll do that math for you.
Yeah. And then I would say, you do your math on the other side, right? Because the flip side of it, sometimes the surcharge for minimums can be so high that it's the same price at the end of the day. So then it comes down to, okay, what's more important for you? Would you rather pay the same price and have more inventory, which maybe, but then also if you're not really sure and you're still testing an item, it might not be worth bringing in 1,000 units at the same price as 500, because that means you have to get through 1,000,
So I have two scenarios in which I did this. One was a lamp. I could pay $50 and get 50, or I could pay $25 and have 100. $2,500 out of pocket both ways. So I went with $25 for 100 lamps. I was like, yeah, I'll sell 100 lamps. I did not sell 100 lamps. But then I have another scenario, the exact same thing with rugs, where the cost for a lower quantity and the cost for a higher quantity ended up, it was going to be the same. And I went again with the higher quantity, and I sold those rugs out in like 2 weeks.
So really, the viability of the item, right? How fast you think you can sell that item, but it doesn't always mean that
No.
the most, cost-effective option, if your quantity is high, is the right answer.
And the rugs were small. They were folded. They could go on a shelf. These are giant lamps. Like if someone was like, think about the amount of space this is going to take, you're going to have to actually get a warehouse for these lamps instead of using your basement. That all contributed to cost. So anyway, that's a long story to say that you might be able to get a much better deal if you just buy a smaller quantity, you pay a little less, and it works for your business. But do the math.
Yeah, definitely do the math.
Let's think about what would you do? What would you do, Jackie, if none of these things work?
Meaning the MOQs just could not work with your business.
Just didn't jive.
Then I think you find a new factory.
Yeah.
I think it's not the right partner for you. And maybe the partner will be great 2 years from now, 1 year from now, 5 years from now. And that's okay. It is okay to keep those relationships that you find and understand that it's probably not the best fit for you right now. And there are many factories out there that are very willing to work on lower minimums. That's what they build their model off of. And so when I have certain clients that I work with, that is really the first question I need to know is what type of opening order do you want to make? And we try our best to have it work within those parameters. But I think there are factories for all different scales at all different points of your business. And obviously, if a factory can scale with you, that's the best, but it's not always the case.
Sure.
So I think just making sure that you're open to saying, okay, if this isn't working, let's find the next.
Yeah, there are, when I talk to people, I refer to them as like boutique factories. I went to a factory in India that made Isabel Marant like sequined skirts. It was so niche. It was so fascinating to watch people sew on these like beads and sequins. But they took very low minimums because it was a very involved, handcrafted type product. Same with jewelry. I have factories that I know would take a 100-piece minimum because they work on just like a higher caliber of product. They work with higher end brands and fine jewelry that, it's not mass market. And then you have these mass market factories that are huge, that like really require a higher order to pay their overhead.
Correct.
So there's all types of factories. That you made a good point. If it's not working with what you need to accomplish, I would find a new factory.
Correct. And again, that next factory might be the perfect partner.
Perfect.
And you just had to ask the questions.
Yeah. So it's all your path, your product path.
Correct.
Okay. So when would we push back versus when would we pivot? And I mentioned this before when I talked about getting the tiered costing from your factory. So when I say push back, I'm going to use air quotes because you never want to burn a bridge. Like Jackie said,
correct.
The factory that maybe isn't a great fit now might be a great fit in a year or 2 years. And you want to be able to go back and say, hey, we spoke already. I'd love to work with you now. My business has grown. They would probably love to hear that. Love to work with you. But pushing back, in air quotes, is just like a kind of negotiation, trying to figure out where those points are that we can budge on. And after you've worked through all of that, I would say, you pivot if none of it works for your bottom line.
Correct. Yeah. Again, first you're going to ask, what are the minimums being driven by? It's probably going to be a combination of raw materials.
That's a great question.
And bulk production. But I think it's good to know which lever is the highest, right? Because then you can determine, okay, if it is the bulk production line, can I pay more for your labor to help offset it? Or if it's raw material driven, okay, can I hold half the fabric? Can you find something available? So then you kind of know which direction to vet out next. And it might be both, might be layers of both, but most likely one is driving more of the MOQ than the other. And so now we've explained how to armor yourselves a little bit with the right questions to ask to get to the bottom of it.
Yes. all really, really great points. And I think even knowing those questions and going to your factory with them and asking them, they're going to say, oh, this person knows what they're doing.
Exactly. And I think that is a huge part of our mission here at the Sourcing Gals, is to give you all the information so that you are the experts. So you can go in confidently into these vendor emails, vendor conversations, factory emails, factory conversations, and ask the right questions. And so you know you're going to get the right answers back from the factory. They understand that you are knowledgeable about the process. You are looking for ways to build this business together. And I think amongst the MOQ conversations, again, that we haven't really talked about is layering in the personal piece of this, the relationship piece with your factory, right? Like if you help explain what you are trying to accomplish, it can go a long way. Like context, I always say context is key. Like in any part of life, context is always so helpful. But with these factories, if you can explain, here's my runway, here's the things I'm building towards, if you're able to help me with this initial order, the goal is to get to X, Y, and Z within the next 6 months, 12 months. So they are business people as well. So if they can see your vision and they're willing to buy into that vision, then maybe they'd be more willing to bend on that MOQ, knowing that it's not your goal to just run a 150 unit product based company, right? Your goal is to grow it. So I think building those relationships, having those conversations, not just being this robotic, what is your MOQ? And like, just going back and forth, like give them the context, let them understand your vision. To me, that is when you're really also going to find those factories that are excited to be your partner.
Absolutely. And even if it's an Alibaba connection, I usually don't just hit that request for quote. I usually go into the messages and say,
Correct.
Hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's a picture of what my design is. Here's what I'm hoping to order. Can you help? Do you have any suggestions? And they'll usually come back, and it's a little bit of a back and forth, but it provides context. It opens up that door, and it just initiates the conversation, which is really all you need at that stage. And I think the other part about that is, from what we've learned, they're not personal. Don't take MOQs personally. No one's trying to be mean. It comes down to the logistics behind how the product's made, how their workforce is paid, and all of those things contribute to the MOQ.
Correct. Well, that was a lot of information, but hopefully this will be really helpful because it's kind of step one in your product journey, to be honest. When you're, when you do find factories, this should be one of the first questions that you ask to make sure that that factory can be aligned with your product, not just the capabilities, but the amount in which you can afford to get made.
Absolutely. It's really hit home. The MOQ drama is real. We've worked with it in our own businesses with clients, and I hope that we've given you enough information to work with it on your own in your venture. If this episode hit home, you are not alone. MOQ drama is very real. We help founders and our clients and our own businesses every day with MOQs. So if you have a question, hit us up. We're on Instagram. You can slide into our DMs, or we're also on YouTube. You can comment there as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, until the next episode, thanks for joining us with
The Sourcing Gals.